The party will only last about 3 hours. Just bear with it for a while. I'll have Patrick bring you some blankets. Today was the day of our housewarming party. Since a few days ago, my 3-year-old daughter, Cecil, had been running a fever over 105 degrees Fahrenheit, and while taking care of her, I also fell ill. I thought I had already asked to cancel the event, but my mother-in-law, Judy, was practically forcing us up into the attic. I couldn't bring myself to say, "Why are we being sent to the attic when Cecil is so sick?" Hearing Judy and my husband, Patrick, talking downstairs, a deep, simmering resentment started to spread in my chest. As I pondered these questions, I looked at Cecil's face. She wasn't smiling her usual, innocent smile, she was just quietly asleep. "Cecil, I'm so sorry for putting you in this situation." I whispered the words softly. It must have been a few hours by now. The lively voices fell silent, and I thought, what's going on? The next moment, a piercing scream echoed through the house. I wasn't just startled, I was suddenly overwhelmed with fear. Holding Cecil tightly in my arms, I strained my ears to catch any sound. My name is Kelly. While preparing breakfast for my 3-year-old daughter, Cecil, I found myself reflecting on my life. I met my husband, Patrick, through a mutual acquaintance. We bonded quickly, perhaps because we both grew up with single parents. Maybe both of us were starved for love in our own ways. I lost my mother at an early age, and Patrick lost his father to divorce. Our shared wounds seemed to draw us together like magnets. Although it sounds a bit romantic, the truth is, I was simply head over heels for Patrick. Even back then, I knew the saying, "Love is blind," and I was fully aware that I was living proof of it. But I didn't mind being blind. That's how deeply I loved him. My mom has been through so much in her life. One day, I want to live with her and take care of her. Patrick was a kind man who adored his mother, and I found that part of him incredibly endearing. Looking back now, though, I realize I hadn't noticed his deep dependence on her at the time. Even while we were dating, he often sought his mother, Judy's, opinion whenever he had to make a decision. "Mom said it's going to rain tomorrow, so we should cancel our date." "Oh, okay, I see. And she also said if we ever get married, we should live near her." Kind of early to think about that, right? Maybe she just really wants grandkids. Back then, I was moved by his kindness and how much he valued family. In hindsight, though, the idea of living near his mom before even getting married should have been a red flag. But at the time, it made me feel accepted, like I was already a part of his world. As his future wife, 3 years into our relationship, Patrick proposed to me, and it felt like a moment of destiny. Judy was thrilled about our marriage and eagerly involved herself in the wedding preparations. "Kelly, you should do it this way. You should do it this way." It became something of a catchphrase for Judy. My opinions were often ignored or dismissed. She must see me as the daughter she never had. I kept trying to convince myself that. After getting married, we rented an apartment close to my in-laws' family. On weekends, Judy often came over with little gifts, and we'd share dinner together, building what seemed like a good relationship. At first, I was genuinely happy. I'd always longed for a mother figure in my life, but over time, those gifts started to be suspicious, and unease began to creep into my heart. They were often strange wild vegetables and mushrooms. I'm not really a fan of mushrooms. I picked these early this morning from the woods near my house. Mushrooms are great for digestion, they're super healthy. Even after declining repeatedly, she'd insist that they were good for my health, and leave them anyway. When I casually brought this up with Patrick, he didn't seem to understand my feelings. "Come on, Mom's just thinking about you. Don't be so harsh on her." His deference to his mother only deepened the pain in my heart. Amid these challenging days, our daughter, Cecil, was born. At that moment, my heart overflowed with joy. The tears won't stop streaming down my face. Holding her tiny hand, I felt an indescribable happiness, a deep sense of fulfillment brought by her presence. My father, Sam, was also overjoyed by Cecil's birth and doted on her more than I had ever seen. The tough exterior he usually wore melted away into a gentle smile every time he looked at her, warming my heart every time. "Cecil, one day we'll have a house with a yard where we can have a barbecue, maybe room for 2 cars, and a store nearby." As we talked about such near future dreams, I began to believe that our family's aspirations could slowly become a reality. Imagining Cecil's smiles and the happy life ahead with Patrick filled my heart with contentment. But that happiness didn't last long. Over time, my relationship with Jitty began casting shadows on my daily life. Her well-meaning gestures started to feel more like suffocating pressure. Patrick's inability to understand my feelings began to sow seeds of doubt and unease in my mind. Those days dragged on, and one autumn day, as a pleasant breeze blew through the colorful leaves, I took 3-year-old Cecil for a walk around the neighborhood. The sight of the trees painted in shades of yellow and red was beautiful, but something heavy in my heart kept me from fully enjoying the scenery. Recently, I'd started to suspect that Patrick and Jitty were looking down on me. It didn't feel like it was just a sign of our relationship becoming more familiar over time. Jitty's gifts always consisted of strange-looking wild vegetables and mushrooms. They were often bizarre in color and appearance, and I wasn't even sure if they were edible. Even after declining multiple times, Jitty never stopped bringing them. "You know, you can buy anything with money, but that's not saving money. A good homemaker knows when to spend and when to save." Well, I suppose that's true. I'm bringing these to help cut down on your grocery bill. It's all for you, Kelly. Jitty's self-congratulatory tone left me with complicated feelings. Does she even care about how I feel? Secretly, I began disposing of her strange gifts without Patrick noticing. The thought of giving those mysterious vegetables to Cecil made me uncomfortable. But my mixed feelings didn't end there. Patrick was a workaholic and never helped with parenting. Yet he constantly wanted to take Cecil to see Jitty. Watching this made a small spark of anger ignite in my heart. I decided to be more direct and firmly told Jitty that I didn't need her gifts. But she reacted dramatically, saying, "I'm doing this for you, Kelly," and making a scene. When I brought this up with Patrick, he dismissed my feelings entirely. "Mom's not wrong," he'd say. It was exhausting. I couldn't think of any solution. On the other hand, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of guilt toward my father. He adored Cecil so much, yet he hardly ever got to see her. Judy was always at our house on weekends, and as a married woman who had left home, I felt hesitant to casually suggest visiting my dad with Patrick. When I called him occasionally, my dad was always kind, and he never missed a chance to celebrate every occasion with gifts, from half-birthdays to regular birthdays. His enthusiasm for these events surprised me. His warmth was a lifeline for me. Amid all of this, we decided to buy a house as Cecil prepared to enter kindergarten. On a rare trip back to my dad's with just Cecil, I shared the news with him, and he gave me an enormous sum of money. "Use this to make your new home comfortable." He pressed the heavy bundle into my hands, a gesture that nearly brought me to tears. The weight of that gift, both literal and emotional, filled me with gratitude I couldn't fully express. All I could do was repeat, "Thank you." I secretly hoped we could buy a house far from my in-laws. Maybe then, things would finally improve. I was holding on to such hopeful thoughts. It was right before we were about to leave, when Judy suddenly announced she would be joining us for the meeting with the realtor. Just as I locked the door and prepared to head out, I saw her standing in front of the apartment, with a smile. The sight gave me a slight chill. You know we can't handle this alone. At the realtor's office, the conversation proceeded without any regard for me. As my frustration grew, Patrick didn't seem to care at all. The realtor, perhaps because Patrick's name was on all the paperwork, seemed to side with him and Judy, leaving me completely out of the loop. I ended up taking Cecil, who was clearly bored, to a small park nearby. There weren't even any playgrounds, so we spent time drawing pictures on the ground. When we got home, I decided to confront Patrick, who was in a great mood. Why did you bring your mom along? Shouldn't decisions about the new house be between the two of us? I feel like I'm being excluded. Come on, Mom's opinions aren't wrong. And if we include her input, it could even help Sam in case anything happens, right? Admittedly, the new house's planned location was close to my father's home. Patrick, with a smug smile, added, "This way, we'll be close enough to help when needed." His words left me speechless. Patrick and Judy weren't entirely wrong. Judy's sociable nature had even won over my nearby relatives. Because of her charm, my relatives pressured me to listen to Judy's advice. It became harder and harder for me to voice my own opinions. Even after that, Judy continued to attend meetings with the realtor and kept bringing her peculiar wild vegetables. My frustration grew to the point where I found myself sighing constantly at work, trouble at home. You're so young. I worked for an event company where most of the staff were part-timers. The only full-time employees were me, in an administrative role, and my boss, who had built the company single-handedly as a single mother. When I vented to her, she bluntly asked, "Have you thought about divorce?" Divorce. It wasn't something that had ever crossed my mind before. But deep down, I couldn't help but wonder how long this unsettling life would continue. In the end, the house was built with very little input from me. A few months later, as the house neared completion, Judy proposed a housewarming party with relatives. Between the chaos of moving and the unfinished state of the house, the idea of hosting a party seemed impossible. Wait, we're not ready. This isn't going to work. It's been decades, but I remember gathering all the relatives for our housewarming when I built my home. I get that, but maybe after we're settled. Enough. A housewarming is meaningless if you wait too long after the house is finished. Timing is everything. Don't you have any common sense? Judy's sharp words startled Cecil, who was standing nearby, and looked frightened. Seeing her reaction, I decided to not argue. I didn't want to make Cecil upset. Reluctantly, I agreed to the housewarming party. Judy's mood instantly shifted from irritation to a cheerful smile. "Great. You'll handle the food preparation, right?" she said, pushing all the responsibility onto me. I did the same when I got married. Everything is a learning experience. Her words rubbed me the wrong way, but I forced myself to accept them. The day before the housewarming, Patrick suddenly announced, "Some relatives are visiting Mom's place. I'm taking Cecil to meet them and show them around." Wait, Cecil has been coughing. She should be resting at home. Kids cough and get fevers all the time. If you're too cautious, they'll never grow up strong. A little push is good for them. After Patrick took Cecil with him, all I could do was worry about her health. I reluctantly prepared for the next day. That evening, Cecil came home worse off than before. Patrick didn't seem to care. He took a long bath and sipped a drink, completely relaxed. Meanwhile, I cared for Cecil and realized I was starting to feel unwell myself. My body felt heavy, and my head was foggy. I mustered the energy to ask Patrick if we could postpone the housewarming. She'll get better if you let her rest. Stop overreacting. And Kelly, you need to work on your time management. Adults are supposed to stay on top of things. Patrick didn't care about my or Cecil's health. Instead, he complained about the food for the next day and insisted I continue preparing, despite my saying I wasn't feeling well. I was barely conscious, my mind hazy, but somehow I still found myself following Patrick's instructions. Before I could even feel anger at how horribly we were being treated, all I wanted was to finish the preparations and collapse into bed. With that in mind, I pushed myself to keep going. On the day of the housewarming, both Cecil and I were running fevers of 105 degrees Fahrenheit. My head was foggy, my body unbearably heavy, and the thermometer in my hand blurred before my eyes. Cecil, with her small feverish body, clung to my arms, whimpering in discomfort, the helplessness of being unable to ease her pain as a mother squeezed my heart painfully. "It's okay, Cecil. Mommy's here," I said softly, smiling as I held her close. Each time I hugged her overheated body, it felt like her suffering reverberated through me, intensifying my own pain. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door of our bedroom. It couldn't be Patrick, he wouldn't bother knocking. Dreading who it might be, I answered weakly. "Yes," Judy's cheerful voice responded, and she entered the room with a bright smile. There had been no sound of the doorbell. She must have just let herself in, as if it were the most natural thing. From the lively chatter coming from the living room, it was clear the relatives had already arrived and were making themselves at home. "Still in bed. You must be exhausted from all the preparations." "Great job," Judy said brightly, but her tone filled me with nothing but irritation. Early that morning, when I noticed Cecil's condition worsening, I had emailed Judy to suggest canceling the housewarming party. Her reply had been brief but clear. "Understood." There was no way she didn't know about Cecil's illness. Yet, here she was, completely disregarding our situation. As I mentioned in my email, Cecil has fever. Yes, I know. We wouldn't want her to spread her cold to everyone, right? Stay in the attic during the party. Patrick had once mentioned wanting to turn the attic into a secret hideout someday, but for now, it was just an empty, unfinished space, accessible only by a ladder from the second-floor bedroom. The attic was nothing more than exposed beams and floorboards, a cold, unwelcoming void. It wasn't a place fit for anyone, let alone someone sick. "The party will only last about 3 hours. Just bear with it for a while. I'll have Patrick bring you some blankets," Judy said, practically shoving us toward the attic. It was as if our presence was an inconvenience. Her cold attitude left me at a loss for words, unable to even protest. I couldn't bring myself to say, "Why the attic? Cecil is sick." Judy didn't care about our suffering. To her, we were nothing more than a nuisance. The relatives downstairs seemed to share her sentiment, their comments cutting deeply, as if blaming me for Cecil's fever. Overwhelmed by frustration and helplessness, I decided to take Cecil to the attic, hoping at least to let her rest. The attic was freezing, the air heavy with a suffocating stillness that enveloped us. It became our refuge to hold our pain in silence. As I held Cecil wrapped in a blanket, I listened carefully. The sounds of Judy and Patrick's voices drifted up, and a slow burning feeling of unforgiveness spread through my chest. From below, I could hear the relatives' laughter and Judy's triumphant cackles. She was likely bad-mouthing me to make herself look good in front of them. "Why do I have to endure this?" Why did no one care about my feelings as a mother? I glanced at Cecil's face. She wasn't smiling her usual, innocent smile, she was just quietly asleep. I'm so sorry, Cecil. I whispered the words softly. What could I do to protect her? My thoughts spiraled endlessly, tears welling up in my eyes. Feeling utterly alone in the attic, all I could do was listen to the chaos outside. I never imagined that being misunderstood and dismissed could feel so isolating. Time in the clockless void seemed to stretch endlessly. Perhaps a few hours had passed. Just as I felt myself starting to drift off to sleep, I noticed a sudden silence from downstairs. Something felt different, as though the atmosphere had shifted. The lively voices had gone completely quiet, and just as I wondered what was happening, a scream pierced the silence. Someone yelled, "Eck!" and help. Groans and screams filled the entire house into chaos. I wasn't just startled, I was suddenly overwhelmed with fear, and held Cecil tightly in my arms while straining my ears. What on earth is happening? A wave of unease tightened around my chest. Their voices were filled with confusion, and one scream after another were heard. My heartbeat quickened, and fear began to take hold of me. I strained my ears and heard someone shouting, "The food! There's something wrong with the food! The food!" I furrowed my brow in confusion. Even though I was in the attic, the forced rest had slightly cleared my head. Fragments of the morning started coming back to me. Earlier, when Judy arrived at the house, she had brought a Tupperware container. It contained what I now remembered as her usual wild vegetables and mushrooms, the ones I often discarded in secret. Is the food Judy proudly prepared actually safe to eat? The groans and panicked voices continued. I could almost picture the relatives arriving in the backyard. Cecil stirred and looked up at me with worried eyes. "Mom, what's going on?" "I don't know, but it's okay. You should try to sleep a bit more," I said, stroking her head gently as I held her close. A short while later, I heard Judy and Patrick's voices. "Call an ambulance. Hurry." Cecil trembled faintly in my arms, startled by the urgency in their voices. I hugged her tightly, trying to shield her from the chaos. The sound of sirens grew louder, stopping just outside the house. Patrick and Judy rushed off with the relatives to the hospital, leaving me and Cecil behind in the attic, forgotten in their panic. While I could understand their urgency, their complete disregard for us left me simmering with anger. Once the noise of their departure faded, I carefully carried Cecil down the ladder and gently laid her on the futon. She was breathing softly, and I whispered, "Rest well," as I kissed her forehead. Looking around the dining area, I noticed that none of the dishes I had painstakingly prepared the day before were on the table. Instead, Judy's creations, likely made from her foraged ingredients, had been served. A mix of emotions churned within me as I realized this. I pulled out my phone and called my father. When I heard his voice on the other end, a flood of relief and sadness washed over me. "Kelly, what's wrong? Are you okay?" His voice was filled with concern, resonating in my heart. "Cecil has fever, and we've been stuck in the attic," I explained, recounting everything that had happened. Though the situation was complex and difficult to articulate, I did my best to convey every detail. Even without seeing his face, I could feel his seriousness and warmth through his responses. His steady acknowledgments carried an effort to truly understand my pain. "I'll come get you right away. Just wait for me." His words gave me strength, and my heart began to lift slowly. The anxieties from the attic started to fade, and I felt a sense of calm settling over me. As I waited for my father, I placed my hand on Cecil's forehead, silently praying for her fever to subside. After some time, the doorbell rang, When I opened the door, my father stood there, his kind eyes meeting mine. "Long time no see," he said with a warm smile. In the days that followed, the relatives who had been hospitalized recovered, though a few required several days of care. Once everyone was well again, a meeting was called at my house to discuss what had happened. The hospital had suspected food poisoning, and one of the relatives had even been in a life-threatening condition. It was suggested that a police report might be necessary, which led to the question of who was responsible. Judy and Patrick were, naturally, at the center of this interrogation. "Why did you lock Kelly and Cecil in the attic during the party?" someone asked. It seemed Judy had told the relatives that Cecil and I were out for the day. Perhaps she had spread rumors about me neglecting my duties as Patrick's wife, claiming I was off having fun somewhere. As this revelation sank in, more questions arose from the relatives. "Did Judy's gossip make us think poorly of Kelly?" someone said. Little by little, the truth began to surface. I remained silent, my head lowered as I listened to the relatives talk. They seemed to realize they had blindly believed Judy's words. "Have we been unfair to Kelly?" one of them asked, echoing the doubts others began to express. Afterward, the relatives sincerely apologized to me. "I'm so sorry for gossiping about you," one said, tears glistening in their eyes. The anger I had harbored in my heart began to dissipate slowly. At the same time, it became clear that the relatives had grown distrustful of Judy and Patrick, and the atmosphere among them turned tense. While I appreciated the apologies, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. It seemed like there was no going back to the way things were, and I quietly accepted that. This wasn't intentional. It was an accident. "Please don't file a report," Patrick pleaded on Judy's behalf, bowing his head desperately. Though some of the relatives seemed unconvinced, Patrick's earnest apologies diffused the situation, and the group ultimately decided to forgive them. Judy, visibly relieved, smiled and handed me a box of pastries. "Here, let's put this behind us. I bought some pound cake. Go ahead and slice it up for everyone. By the way, you do know I've been staying at my parents' house since the housewarming party, right?" Patrick told me. "Cecil's sick, so you're lying around at your parents' place, aren't you? Honestly, how lucky you are. You're leaving Patrick to fend for himself while you take it easy." I chose not to respond, biting my tongue. The other relatives looked at Judy with pity or disdain. I silently took the pound cake, sliced it neatly, and served it to everyone before leaving the house without another word. Days later, Patrick and Judy showed up at my parents' house. The loud banging on the door startled me. I had anticipated they might come, but I hadn't expected them to arrive so soon or with such hostility. "Kelly, open the door right now," Judy's voice rang out angrily. Her tone was dripping with fury, and I felt a sense of unease stirring inside me. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home. As I stood at the door, hesitating, my father placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder and gave me a silent nod. He was right. I couldn't keep running away. When I opened the door, Judy and Patrick glared at me with irritated expressions. "Because of you, the entire family has turned against us." Apparently, my abrupt departure from the house had caused more backlash from the relatives. Perhaps they questioned whether Judy had mistreated me to the point of driving me away. Since some had even hinted at filing a police report, Judy demanded to come with them and apologize to the family. Her anger escalated, and she seemed to insinuate that everything was my fault. "This is all because you got sick on such an important day. How could you catch a cold? Aren't you supposed to be Patrick's wife?" I thought back to how much I had suffered that day, but I knew explaining my side would do no good. Judy wouldn't understand. My father, standing behind me, offered, "Why don't you both come inside for now?" But Judy ignored him, continuing to berate me. "And why didn't you stop me from serving the food?" I blinked, confused at the question. What? Even in my fevered state, I had managed to prepare food for the party. If my dishes had been served, there wouldn't have been any issues, yet she chose to serve her mysterious wild vegetables and mushrooms instead. "Why didn't you explain to everyone that the mistakes in the preparations were your fault? Now I'm the one being blamed for everything." Judy's voice was filled with irrational anger, and her words dripped with resentment. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm and collected. "Let me remind you, the hospital confirmed that your homemade dishes were the cause of the food poisoning. Those wild vegetables and mushrooms, where exactly did you even get them?" "From a nearby spot where I've been foraging for years. We've always eaten them without any problems." "Didn't you realize that without proper knowledge, wild plants and mushrooms can be dangerous?" Judy fell silent, her expression bitter and tinged with regret. Patrick, meanwhile, stood awkwardly behind his mother, avoiding eye contact and shifting uncomfortably. It was clear he couldn't muster his usual boldness in front of my father. I suddenly felt a strange indifference toward everything. Calmly, I reached for the divorce papers I had placed on a nearby shelf by the entrance and handed them to Patrick. "These are divorce papers. Sign them," I said firmly. Patrick's face twisted with shock and confusion. "I can't agree to a divorce," he protested, with Judy chiming in to back him up. But I had prepared for this moment. I revealed the evidence I had gathered of their verbal abuse and mistreatment, and their faces turned pale. "Evidence? What evidence? What could we possibly have done to you?" "That day, the food you served to the relatives contained poisonous mushrooms." "Poisonous mushrooms? That's impossible." "I mean, that's right. After all, you always brought those same mushrooms to our house as gifts, didn't you?" It had always seemed suspicious to me. Why would Judy risk serving something dangerous to the relatives? "You brought them to our house to test them on me, didn't you? When I didn't complain or say anything, you assumed they were safe to eat, didn't you?" "Wait, you didn't actually eat them." "If I had, I would have gotten sick. I kept photos of all the wild plants and mushrooms you gave us. A specialist analyzed them, and it turns out they often contain toxic elements." I didn't say it aloud, but the implication was clear. Judy's actions could be considered attempted harm. She seemed to grasp my meaning, and for a moment, she was speechless. "But what about the house loan?" "Kelly, we both agreed to share it," Patrick exclaimed, clutching his head in despair. Judy, observing the flow of the conversation, paused as if considering her next move. "Kelly, think of Cecil. Divorce would be so hard on her. A child needs her father, or she'll be so lonely without him," Judy said, trying to appeal to my maternal instincts. Her words didn't resonate with me. After all, hadn't Judy raised Patrick as a single mother herself? At that moment, my father walked into the room, gently holding Cecil's hand. Her tiny hand was clasped securely in his large, kind one. He drew her close and gazed lovingly into her eyes. "It seems Cecil has something to say." "Oh, that's right. You wouldn't like it if Dad and Mom fought, would you?" "Cecil, why don't you tell Mom to behave?" Standing beside my father, Cecil's eyes seemed to hold a special kind of resolve. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. The 3-year-old girl, nervous but determined, raised her small face to speak. "Mom, I don't like Dad and Grandma because they're mean to you," Cecil declared boldly. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Her words rang out like a clap of thunder in the silence, resonating deeply with everyone present. Patrick and Judy were left speechless, their faces frozen in shock. Neither had expected such strong words from a 3-year-old. Even I was taken aback. The conviction in Cecil's voice pierced through us all, her small frame delivering a powerful, unspoken rebuke. Holding tightly onto my father's hand, Cecil's eyes sparkled with determination. Patrick and Judy, shaken by her directness, stood rooted to the spot, unable to respond. "Cecil, Grandma and I aren't being mean to Mom. I don't like you either. And you too. You," Judy gasped, pointing to herself in disbelief. "Not Dad nor Grandma, but you. Could there be a more detached way of addressing someone?" Cecil's voice trembled with emotion, on the verge of tears. Yet, she stood firm, her small frame radiating determination. My heart swelled with pride at her growth. The fact that little Cecil could express her feelings so clearly was extraordinary. Patrick, unable to hide his panic, pleaded with her. "Hey, Cecil, don't say you hate Dad." But Cecil brushed his hand away with defiance. "I hate you because you're mean to Mom," she declared, her tone even stronger than before, like a cry from the depths of her heart. Judy, visibly shaken, scrambled to regain control. She rummaged through her bag and triumphantly pulled out some candy, holding it out to Cecil with both hands. "Look, sweetie. Here, have some candy. Let's all get along with Dad and Grandma, okay? These are delicious." The colorful candies shimmered invitingly, but Cecil ignored them coldly. No matter how tempting the offer, her feelings were unshakable. Watching the scene, I couldn't help but smile. Patrick and Judy stood frozen, overwhelmed by Cecil's words. The impact of their actions was laid bare by the straightforward truth spoken by a 3-year-old. "This can't be real. This has to be a misunderstanding. You've made such a small child say this. Now get out of here." "Wait, this is all a misunderstanding. I mean, this isn't. Did you not hear me? I said get out." Though he was usually a gentle man, his commanding presence came through now, his voice filled with authority. Both Judy and Patrick widened their eyes in shock and hurriedly left under his intense gaze. That day marked the beginning of the end for my marriage to Patrick. While I felt no hesitation about the divorce, a swirl of complicated emotions brewed within me. The prospect of ending things with Patrick brought a sense of liberation. Yet, when I thought of Cecil, my heart ached. The days we had spent as a happy family now felt like a distant memory. I had loved Patrick once. That's why I married him. I don't regret that decision, but I no longer had confidence in our ability to continue as a family with him as a father. And so I chose divorce. I resolved to live without regrets. A few days later, Patrick called me. When I picked up the phone, I noticed an unusual tension in his voice. "I'm taking custody of Cecil." "What are you talking about?" I snapped, raising my voice. I had assumed custody would naturally go to me, so his words made my heart race with anxiety. Patrick's calm demeanor only fueled my anger further. "You've barely taken care of her. It's better if I take custody," he said, as if it were an undeniable truth. His words carried no hint of love for Cecil. It was nothing more than a vindictive move. "I'll never allow that. I'll protect Cecil." Patrick didn't want custody out of love for his daughter. He intended to use her as a pawn for revenge, and to ensure Judy had someone to care for her in the future. Later, I learned that Patrick had told his lawyer I wasn't properly caring for Cecil. How could he stoop so low? I had devoted myself entirely to taking care of her. Yet he was determined to erase all my efforts. One day, A meeting was held at the lawyer's office. Patrick, brimming with confidence, presented his case to the lawyer. But his lies were quickly uncovered. The relatives who had fallen ill from the food had also been informed of the situation. They came forward to defend me, providing testimonies that proved Patrick's claims were false. The lawyer calmly stated, "There's no point in lying. The evidence is clear." Patrick's face twisted in disbelief and panic as he realized his lies had collapsed around him. His lies had caused him to lose all trust, and custody of Cecil was granted to me. I would be able to live with her, to have her by my side. For me, this was a victory. A deep sense of relief and reassurance filled me, knowing I could protect Cecil. Even so, Patrick clung stubbornly to his last shreds of pride, warning me, "You'll regret this one day." His words carried an air of desperation, but they didn't faze me. When our conversation ended, Patrick walked away silently, his figure appearing smaller with each step. As I watched him leave, I firmly made my resolve. From this point forward, I will build a happy future with Cecil. Step by step, a glimmer of hope began to shine within me. Several months later, I successfully finalized the divorce proceedings with Patrick. A new chapter of life with Cecil began. Patrick, unable to pay the mortgage on his own, was forced to sell the house. It was somewhat ironic to see him let go of the home he had once boasted about. Even the attic he had dreamt of turning into a secret hideout would soon be covered with insulation by the new owners. Peace began to return to my life. Thinking about everything Patrick put me through, it's only natural to feel a hint of satisfaction at his downfall. Judy, meanwhile, faced relentless blame from the relatives. She lost her grandchild and the idyllic retirement she had envisioned. The days when she proudly showed off the new house now felt like a distant dream. That house was no longer hers. Worse still, news of Judy and Patrick's divorce shortly after building the house spread quickly, making their everyday life awkward and filled with gossip. After selling the house, they reportedly tried to move back into the in-laws' family home. But since the property belonged to other relatives, this caused further conflict. The strained relationships, worsened by Judy's disastrous cooking at the housewarming party, ultimately led to them being kicked out. While I felt a slight twinge of pity, I later heard that they had moved into a shabby, old apartment together. Such a close mother and son, I thought with a faint, bemused smile. As for me, I was finally enjoying my new life. Thanks to the understanding and flexibility of my boss, I shifted to working mostly from home. This allowed me to spend more quality time with Cecil than ever before. As we prepared for her start at kindergarten, I shared joyful moments with her, reading picture books and working on crafts together. "Mom, look at this." Cecil came running over with a piece of paper in her hand. In her tiny hands, she proudly held up a colorful drawing she had made, her face beaming with pride. "Wow, Cecil, that's amazing. You're so talented," I said with a big smile. Her eyes sparkled with pride, filling my heart with happiness. My father, thrilled to spend more time with his granddaughter, often visited our apartment. His warmth and kindness made a deep impression on Cecil, who had grown to adore him. Watching them play together filled me with a profound sense of contentment. Though my days were busy with work and parenting, I felt fulfilled and grateful. Sometimes I hugged Cecil tightly, savoring her warmth. In those moments, I was reminded of how irreplaceable our happiness was. "I love you, Mom." "I love you, too, Cecil." Her smile grew even brighter, and I silently wished for that moment to last forever. Our future brimmed with love and hope. The past with Patrick was behind me, and a new life with Cecil lay ahead. I vowed to treasure this happiness and walk forward together with her, no matter what the future held.
Take care of the kids for me. What do you mean, take care of them? Yosef said it so casually, but would I have accepted it if nothing had happened? I'm still not sure. Yosef was supposed to be on a business trip, but apparently, he got into an accident at his destination. I received a call and went to St. Helena, known for a resort. The sudden increase in business trips, happening several times a month, was suspicious. And an employee of a copier company getting into a traffic accident in a touristic place? Something was definitely up. While I was at the hospital thinking about all this, I ran into my sister, Emily. Why was Emily here? And why was she in this place with Yosef? Even in this clearly cornered situation, he thought he could still cover it up. It was infuriating. Did he think I would just let this slide? I have strong allies, so Yosef can't escape without consequences. He should face reality and reconsider his future actions. My name is Ivy. I'm a 33-year-old preschool teacher. After graduating from a community college in the state, I started working at a fairly large town's preschool. Being a preschool teacher is more challenging than I thought, but being around the always smiling children somehow cleanses my heart. However, since I'm always dealing with children at work, sometimes I crave conversations with adults. Even when I want to have age-appropriate conversations with adults, I look around and see dozens of children. There are a few fellow teachers, but in front of the children, we are always just teachers. Work is busy, and it's hard to find time to catch up with friends from college. I don't have time to make friends with shared hobbies either, so I'm always Mississippi Sanders when interacting with others. I interact and connect as a teacher, not as an adult in an adult conversation. At my workplace, the preschool, I am just a teacher and nothing more. One day, a senior colleague handed over the task of managing the copier at work. It was a job previously handled by a teacher going on maternity leave, and it fell to me, the one who seemed the most idle and timid. Honestly, managing the copier was just an additional burden. I wanted to leave work early and have fewer tasks, so to me, it was just a chore. Handling the copier management on top of my usual work was unbearable. Making sure the copier worked smoothly, refilling ink, managing the paper stock. These were the most troublesome tasks. But I never imagined that someone who would dispel my gloomy feelings would appear. In the early afternoon, the preschool bell rang, summoning the person in charge of the copier to the office. Since it was nap time for the children, I informed my partner teacher and headed to the office. "Excuse me, I'm here to check the copier." At that moment, I felt a reaction as if an electric current had run through me. I didn't know why, maybe his looks? His voice? There was something indescribable. "Oh, yes. I'm in charge. I took over from the previous person. Nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you too. I'm from the copier company." My first impression of Yosef was strange. It wasn't the kind of feeling one usually has for a business contact. It was oddly familiar. "Oh, the girl from the morning. But you wouldn't know me. Do you sometimes stop by the convenience store near the bus terminal in the morning?" I remembered with that one sentence. "Oh, the one by the new snack section at the convenience store." Sometimes, I stop by the convenience store near the bus terminal to buy lunch or drinks. Depending on the day, I purchase different items, but when I go at a set time, there's always someone there. Just after entering the store, near the prominently displayed shelf of new products, stands a man intently choosing what to buy. That was him. "You know, I used to see you at the convenience store. I never imagined we'd meet like this." That's my line. I was curious about the new snacks, but I was also curious about the young lady I sometimes saw. Could such a thing really happen? Usually, I deal with children at work and have no opportunities to meet men, but I remember feeling a flutter in my heart at that moment. I don't think it's appropriate to talk about work here. How about exchanging contact information? If you don't mind, that is. Of course, I don't mind. I'd be happy to. On the day I was meeting with the copier company representative, we ended up exchanging contact information out of the blue. That became the catalyst for us to gradually get closer. As we talked about daily happenings and amusing incidents, he became someone I was increasingly interested in. At first, it was love at first sight for me. But as I got to know Ivy, I realized that being with her made me feel so at ease. Please marry me. I can't believe this day would come. I'm so happy. I thought I would spend my life dedicated to my work, growing older, but happiness suddenly came to me. Meeting again with someone I had passed by casually in the city, deepening our connection, and moving towards marriage. At that moment, I was at the peak of happiness, but at the same time, I had another thought in my mind. I won't end up like my sister, Emily. I will seize my own happiness. That's what I whispered to myself. My sister, Emily, is 2 years older than me. People think we must be close because we're not far apart in age, but that's a complete misunderstanding. I am the quiet type, if I do say so myself. I'm average in studies and fashion, and I decided to become a childcare worker simply because I love being around children. On the other hand, Emily is my exact opposite and spares no effort in being fashionable. She's always thinking about how to stay beautiful and how to dress up. In terms of social hierarchy, she was at the top, always wearing the latest trends, belonging to a group that others admired. Perhaps because of her social circles, she was always in relationships with men since her school days. Since she got her first boyfriend in the first year of middle school, Emily never had a period without a boyfriend. Right after graduating high school, she moved out to live with her then boyfriend. Eventually, she settled down at 25 because she had a daughter, but soon got divorced. We're connected on social media, so I occasionally check if she's doing well. She continues to post photos of herself all dressed up, but they leave me feeling a sense of emptiness. More than being a mother, she can't stand not being number one. Just like in her childhood, her surface is decorated like a facade. It's not about showing others how happy I am. I believed that weaving a life filled with true happiness with Yosef was what mattered. Right after getting married, I was happy. I loved coming home to the person I adored, eating dinner together, and spending peaceful evenings. Sharing what happened that day and laughing together felt irreplaceable. However, at some point, Yosef's words started to bother me. It was because Yosef began commenting on my appearance and behavior. He seemed like the type who wanted to control people according to his own wishes, constantly meddling in things. At first, I tried not to let it bother me, but there are things one simply cannot endure. Hey, Ivy, don't you ever wear makeup? Oh, this? As a daycare worker, it tends to come off while taking care of the kids or playing with them, so I don't wear much. But showing up to work like that isn't right, is it? Is it really that strange? I've always dressed like this. That day, I was wearing a hoodie and jeans. Since I commute by bike to the daycare, I prioritize ease of movement and change into my work clothes before starting my shift, so there's no real problem. I've always commuted in this style. Most working women in their 30s don't go out in such casual clothes. It's like you're in loungewear. Really? I've always dressed like this, but why are you bringing it up now? He often complains about my clothes and belongings. Starting with my bag and outfit, he also criticizes my hairstyle and makeup, saying they're not feminine or appropriate for a working adult. Once, when we went out for lunch and stopped by a bookstore downtown, he picked up a women's magazine and said, "Hey, why don't you ever dress like this, Ivy?" It was a magazine targeting office ladies, with glamorous headlines and decorations on the cover. Winning dresses to catch his eye this summer, perfect $300 outfit for a summertime date, honestly, things far removed from my interests. Sorry, but I'm not really into this kind of thing. I don't wear such outfits for work, and they don't suit me. Oh, I see. So you have no intention of dressing to please me. With that, he became sulky. It's been 6 months since we got married, and just when he started saying strange things, he would suddenly get moody. I didn't understand what he wanted or was thinking. Since that day, our relationship has been somewhat strained. We only talk when necessary, with no room for enjoyable chats or lighthearted jokes. It feels like there's a cold breeze blowing between us. We haven't had a major argument, nor do I remember saying anything that warranted an apology. At this point, I can't pinpoint what caused the rift in our relationship. If there was a past argument or issue, we could work to resolve it, but honestly, I have no idea. If I had to guess, it might be because I refused to wear the clothes he wanted me to. Is that it? But since we live together, sharing the same space and time, there are moments when we can casually talk if the mood aligns. Just as a TV program about infidelity came on, we were watching together. The usual commentators and hosts were debating the definition of cheating and where the line between acceptable and unacceptable lies. Of course, I think cheating is absolutely unacceptable. I've even broken up with a past boyfriend because of his infidelity. Given that I don't tolerate cheating even in a dating relationship, I believe it's even less acceptable in a marriage to secretly engage with someone of the opposite sex. Casually, I brought up the topic with him. "Hey, this TV show is talking about cheating." "Yeah, well, everyone's got their own take on what love is." "Love takes different forms, that's true." Then Yosef started talking like a machine gun, as if trying to convince me. "I mean, seriously? A marriage certificate, just one piece of paper, and you're not allowed to love anyone else ever again? Isn't that weird? I'm just saying, what's wrong with some freedom in love?" Frankly, Yosef's words didn't sound like those of a married person. It felt like there was something hidden behind them. He might have had a reason for saying something so out of character. After all, is Yosef the type of person who wants to continue pursuing romantic interests even after getting married? And love isn't determined by the institution of marriage, but by the depth of your feelings, right? No matter how married you are, if you don't truly love the person, it's kind of pointless, isn't it? Hearing him say something like that made me wonder what marriage meant to him, and more than anything, it cast a shadow over my heart. It felt as if those words were directed at me, and I couldn't bring myself to look Yosef in the eyes. How could I have fallen for someone who could say something so unbelievable without changing his expression? Maybe I wasn't thinking straight back then. No matter how many days passed, his words kept bothering me. He's not the kind of person who would joke about something like that, and that's what made it even more perplexing. I felt a strange mix of confusion and a desire to know the truth. Was there a way to find out more? I flipped through a few pages of my work files while pondering. Yes, maybe I could ask that person. One day, Yosef came home without looking at me and said this right away. "Oh, I'm going on a business trip starting tomorrow." "What? Another trip? You were gone for about 3 days last week too, right?" Ignoring my surprise, he remained indifferent. "It can't be helped. Someone suddenly quit at this time of year, and we're short-staffed. Since I'm a reliable expert, I have to keep the workplace running. Because he said it so suddenly, I couldn't help but ask. Hey, do I know the person who quit? Was it that colleague you mentioned before? Yosef used to tell me about things that happened at work and funny stories, so I knew some of the people he talked about frequently. I asked casually, but Yosef's expression hardened. What? Does it matter? Does it have anything to do with you, Ivy? No, it doesn't. It's just a casual conversation. Then Yosef, clearly annoyed, cut the conversation short and went to the bathroom. Recently, it feels like his business trips have been increasing. It's been 3 years since we got married, and there haven't been any notable changes like department transfers or promotions. He hasn't mentioned anything like that, not even once. But suddenly, his business trips became more frequent. Once a month turned into twice, then 3 times. Now, there are weeks when he's away twice, sometimes he's gone for the entire week. The next day, before going to work, Yosef said something to me. This trip is for an important client, so don't even think about contacting me. What, really? Telling me not to contact him no matter what seemed really serious. Got it? If my phone rings and I get distracted during a crucial meeting, it'll be your fault. Do you think you can handle being responsible if we lose a $10 million contract? He left, and I watched his back as he headed to work. I got ready to go to my own workplace. As usual, I put on a hoodie and jeans and rode my beloved bike. After working at my job and finishing my tasks, I took a break. There was a TV on in the break room, showing a report about a traffic accident. I was chatting with a coworker about the dangers of traffic accidents when my phone rang. I usually don't carry my phone with me at work, but I had it with me in the break room, so I noticed the call right away. The phone call was from an unknown number, and I answered it curiously, only to find it was from the police. They were informing me that Yosef had been in a car accident. He had seemed fine just a few days ago, and now he was in an accident. I couldn't believe it, but I pulled myself together to listen to what they had to say. Unfortunately, he had been seriously injured in the accident and was being taken to the hospital. They told me he hadn't regained consciousness yet and that I needed to come immediately. I quickly asked for the location of the accident and the name of the hospital where he was taken. But as I asked for the name, a question arose in my mind. The police station was in St. Helena, a well-known resort area. Does he go on business trips to such places too? That thought crossed my mind briefly. But anyway, I needed to get to him as soon as possible. We can talk about everything else later. I talked to my boss, left work early, and took some time off to rush to Yosef's side. However, before heading to Yosef, there was something I had to do first. I made a call to a certain place. Soon, they told me they would send the documents to my home. When I arrived at the hospital, he was lying in bed. It took him 5 days after the accident to finally regain consciousness. The doctor told me that he had collided head-on with a truck, suffering significant injuries, and as a result, he was paralyzed on one side of his body. No way. Yosef, it can't be true. Sorry, but please take care of the 2 of us. I couldn't help but wonder. Take care of the 2 of you? What on earth was he talking about? It didn't seem like a joke given the situation, so I asked. Sorry, who do you mean by the 2 of you? Yosef had a momentary look of realization, as if he had slipped up. Who? Well, it's obvious, me and Riley. Riley was Emily's daughter, my niece. I had only met her a few times at family gatherings, but why was she suddenly being mentioned here? Why Riley's name all of a sudden? Well, she contacted me during my business trip and said that if anything happened to me, to take care of her. Riley contacted Yosef specifically? And the first thing that came to my mind was, why not ask Emily? I blurted out without thinking. Did Yosef and Riley exchange contact information? Not Riley, more like Emily, kind of. Yosef and Emily had exchanged contact information? And now he was asking me to take care of them? And most importantly, Yosef's hesitant tone was really bothering me. With so many questions, I didn't know where to start when a nurse came in, wheeling a mobile bed. This is the other passenger involved in the same accident, she said, bringing the bed over. The moment I saw who was on the bed, I screamed. Because the woman on that bed was unmistakably Emily. And she had a big belly. Emily? Why are you here? And that belly, is it possible? The nurse had said she was the other passenger in the accident. And those two people Yosef mentioned, could it be? So, the car accident happened, and there's nothing we can do, so please take care of me and Emily. Wow! You get it quickly. It's great to have a smart woman in situations like this. I felt the blood drain from my head. This was too perfect to be a coincidence. It couldn't be just a coincidence. I was scared to ask, but I couldn't help it. So, Yosef, are you telling me that you went on a resort with Emily under the guise of a business trip, and then had a car accident during that trip? Well, the business trip was real, it's not a lie or anything. I just happened to see Emily and decided to give her a ride. His stuttering and desperate excuses are pathetic. I can somehow tell that my voice is trembling. I can't fully grasp the situation I'm in right now. Oh, so you just happened to run into Emily on a business trip, and then conveniently decided to enjoy a trip together? Really? I couldn't help but continue speaking rapidly to Yosef. My feelings were a chaotic mix of not wanting to hear any more and knowing I couldn't ignore this. Whether he realized how I felt or not, Yosef responded in a carefree tone. He still didn't seem to understand the gravity of the situation. He was probably thinking about how to cover it up. His eyes were darting around frantically. No, you're overinterpreting. You always jump to the worst conclusions. It's one of your bad habits. I saw this as my chance and confronted him with the truth. Yosef, this was a fake business trip, wasn't it? Just a cover for a romantic getaway with Emily. I would never fake a business trip. I'm a well-respected and busy man. I don't have time for fake trips. He still thought he could talk his way out of this, believing that shouting would erase the truth. So, you didn't fake the business trip? Do you think yelling at me will make the CEO believe you? Yosef prioritizes his job and his reputation above all else. He works solely for the praise and recognition from his superiors. Just mentioning the CEO's name made him falter. When I said the CEO's name, he seemed momentarily scared. Huh? CEO? What does the CEO have to do with this? If you really didn't do anything wrong, you should be able to explain everything to the CEO. Well, if you can. Yosef sneered and responded. Ivy, you have no experience in corporate life. The CEO wouldn't get involved in a regular employee's business trip. It's embarrassing that you don't know that. Say whatever you want. By the way, I have a letter from the CEO for you. As soon as he saw the envelope with the company logo, he suddenly seemed excited. This finally means my achievements are recognized. All these years working from the bottom up, enduring as a regular employee for over 15 years, it was worth it. Oh, so you're getting a promotion? I couldn't help but ask, barely holding back laughter at Yosef's confident assumption. Of course. My peers have been getting promoted, and I've been waiting my turn for 10 long years. It's been tough, but hard work pays off. Give me the letter. He genuinely seemed to think it was a promotion letter. Here you go. Take your time and read it. I handed him the envelope and he snatched it, slamming it down on the hospital table. He looked at it intently with a tense expression. He slowly tore open the envelope with the company logo. As he unfolded the paper, his previously excited demeanor froze. A dismissal notice. Termination for cause? Why me? The envelope was indeed from the CEO of the company Yosef worked for. Look, there are more documents in the envelope. Maybe you'll understand if you read them. Shut up. Damn it. He angrily turned the envelope upside down, shaking out all the contents. The documents fell haphazardly onto the table, with a few scattering onto the floor. It's about the issues with the submitted receipts and the business trip routes. Do you recognize these documents? No way! There's no way! In fact, I had contacted the CEO of Yosef's company right after the accident and had them check everything, including the company mobile phone's GPS and the expense receipts. The CEO himself had been suspicious of Yosef's actions. I am grateful to the CEO for taking proactive steps because it was a call from an employee's wife. Thanks to the CEO's own involvement, we were able to gather solid evidence in an instant that Yosef couldn't overturn by himself. No matter how much he struggled, it was undeniable that Yosef had made a fictitious business trip and misused company expenses. It seems like the CEO has been keeping a close eye on Yosef as well. As expected, the CEO has been thoroughly watching you. Shut up! Shut up! It's already over. Your usual tricks and lies won't work anymore. How much did you know? How much? I already knew you were going to be fired. In fact, right after I asked them to start the investigation, the CEO had informed me that they were planning to fire him. However, considering Yosef's long service at the company, they also said they would accept his voluntary resignation. Being fired for cause. Hey, what am I supposed to do now? Oh, but Ivy, you're a childcare worker, so it's fine for you, right? Fine for me? What do you mean? I asked Yosef, who had a self-satisfied expression on his face. Because you have qualifications, you can work anywhere anytime. I do have a childcare qualification, but I'll be a stay-at-home dad and take care of Emily and Riley. Nowadays, you can ask for help from volunteers or helpers for childcare. And during that time, Ivy will work. Isn't that a great idea? I was disgusted by his terrible speech, delivered with flared nostrils. His unbelievably selfish statements made a mix of exasperation and anger well up inside me. Who would lend you a hand? You and the volunteers. I couldn't understand his belief that he could still rely on someone for help. Living while helping each other is essential, but it's clear that he only thought about getting help one-sidedly. It's not wrong to rely on someone, but living a life where you're constantly thinking about getting help from others is beyond me. I didn't go through the trouble of getting a childcare qualification to support a cheating, dishonest person. I'm not working to live with someone like that. I handed Yosef the business card of the lawyer I had already hired and told him. We're getting a divorce. I'll be getting compensation from the divorce trial. For anything else, go through the lawyer. Huh? Demanding compensation from a paralyzed person, are you a devil? Do you know what you're doing? I sighed in exasperation and said, Do you know what you're doing? I should ask you the same question. If you think back on what you've done, maybe you'll understand. You married me because you loved me, right? The vows in sickness and in health, was that a lie? He grabbed the hem of my clothes with his functioning hand, but I forcefully shook it off. Then I finished telling Yosef everything and looked down at Emily in the bed next to him. Hey, Emily. You've always needed to be number one, haven't you? Even with me, your own sister. Emily's face momentarily showed a hint of fear, but she quickly returned to her usual expression. That's right. I can't stand that Quiet Ivy got married successfully. I was supposed to marry a rich man first. Marry a rich man? I asked without thinking. That's right. The guy I dated right after high school was into gambling and never worked. Then I dated Riley's dad, who had a low salary, and we lived in an apartment forever. I can't take it anymore. Emily cried, but her words were completely selfish. You're always thinking about what others can do for you. I'm a woman. My job is to be beautiful, to be a shining jewel by my husband's side. Well, Yosef may not be that good-looking, but he works for a well-known company, and I thought his salary might be good. She said this while glaring at me. It's because you didn't break up with him quickly that we had to hide and be together in secret, and that's why the accident happened. Emily glanced back and forth between Yosef and me. So, you're saying it's my fault? Isn't it? What else? You chose your partners yourself. And using someone's income as a reason to go after another woman's husband is just not right. I felt my head starting to ache from talking to these two any longer, so I decided to cut it short. Besides, staying in the hospital room too long would be a nuisance. I was amazed at how easily these lines came out, like something from a drama. The sheer absurdity of her words left me speechless for a moment. We'll discuss the rest through lawyers, Emily. For now, here's a lump sum for compensation. That's all I'll say. What? Compensation? For someone who's paralyzed? You sound just like Yosef. It's laughable. It's unfortunate that you're paralyzed, but you were on a cheating trip, weren't you? It's your own fault. Emily reacted strongly to my words. You brought this on yourself. I muttered under my breath that it wasn't my fault, watching her face gradually turn pale, wondering how far she would go to avoid responsibility. In the end, Yosef and I got divorced. I had hired a lawyer who specialized in divorce cases, and we managed to get a higher settlement than usual from Yosef and Emily. I heard that after quitting his job, Yosef has been drifting from place to place. Emily, having tried to take her sister's husband, was disowned by her family and has been wandering with no place to go. She had found temporary support at a facility for people with disabilities, but all she did was complain, saying things like, "This isn't the kind of work I should be doing and I can't stand these tedious tasks." Not only was she unproductive, but she was also a nuisance to other users, leading to her being banned from the facility. Without access to welfare services or job placements, she has been surviving on the bare minimum disability insurance. As for Emily's child, Riley, I contacted Riley's dad, who gladly took him in. During the divorce, there was a custody battle, but Emily's fixed idea that a child should be with their mom and the mediator's decision resulted in her getting custody. I was a bit worried about Riley, so I was relieved when he was taken in by his dad. I felt that Riley could never truly be happy staying with Emily, so this was a comfort. I continue to work at the daycare, living my usual life. Regarding the settlement, Yosef's share was paid by his family, while Emily took out a loan to pay her part. Even though I received more money than I had expected, the happy days when I knew nothing are gone forever. With that, I can only move forward. No matter how much I look back, I can't return to those days, so I must move on. Maybe quitting my job and traveling to a foreign country I've never been to might be a good idea. With all these thoughts running through my mind, I spend my days. The doorbell rang. Eddie, my husband, was home. Usually, I would go to the door to greet him, but today I didn't have the energy to rush down. The doorbell rang again, louder and more impatient this time, than the sound of the door unlocking and opening.
Hey! At least come and greet me properly.
I could hear his voice shouting from downstairs. Summoning all the strength I could, I replied,
I'm sorry. I've been taking care of Mila, and I'm not feeling well either.
Our daughter Mila had come home from school early with a high fever. Taking care of her, I too had started to feel feverish and dizzy. Eddie didn't respond, whether he heard me or not. I could just hear his heavy footsteps, indicating his displeasure.
Hey! Dinner isn't ready.
I couldn't help but be exasperated by Eddie's predictable behavior and heartless words.
Hey! I've got an important meeting tomorrow. I can't afford to get sick from her.
Eddie glared at me with a puzzled look, waving me away. Then, out of nowhere, he took my sheets to the storage room. He even went upstairs and ripped off Mila's sheets while she was sleeping. Mila shrank back, confused by the sudden commotion.
Sick people need to be isolated. Go to the storage room. No way.
Mila and I were pushed into the cramped storage room with no windows. My name is Noelle. I live in a suburban house, spending my days doing household chores. Eddie leaves for work by 7 a.m., having worked at an insurance company for nearly 30 years since graduating college. Eddie always gets dressed in his suit by 6 a.m., appears in the living room, sits at the table, and picks up the newspaper I laid out for him. Then he silently sips the coffee I hand him and eats the toast with a generous amount of margarine. Our routine hasn't changed since we got married, even after having children, even on days off. His dedication to his job has earned him recognition, and he now holds a managerial position. I found out about his promotion much later, as he didn't even bother to share the news. Looking back, Eddie remained unchanged in our marriage, while I evolved. Since childhood, I loved reading, always immersing myself in books whenever I had free time. I would sometimes go out to play with friends, but even then, I'd be thinking about the book I was reading. Naturally, the more outgoing kids formed other groups, and fewer people gathered around me. At the time, it didn't hurt me. I was actually happy to have more time to myself. Spending time in the library, surrounded by books I loved, shaped half of my life. People might have seen me as a bit of a loner. But sometimes, I could be unexpectedly proactive. I hated wasting time the most. Reading and diving into the world of books required a quiet environment and plenty of time. Pointless discussions that never reached a conclusion, committees where no one volunteered and only silence remained, all these things just ate into my day. So, if I thought stepping up would wrap things up quickly, I'd immediately raise my hand and give my opinion. It's funny to think about it now, but this assertiveness once got me elected as the leader for a sports day event. At that time, I thought finishing the event quickly would ensure I had time to read, so I had a long-term plan in mind. Eddie and I met at a university club. That's where I met Eddie. Eddie always prioritized efficiency and acted accordingly, even as a student. It wasn't fate or a passionate love confession that brought us together. Other members of the club often enjoyed their university life adventures, so the clubroom was usually empty. Most of the time, it was just him and me in the clubroom. Even in the same space, there was no pressure, and we naturally started talking about literature. This is what it means to have good chemistry, I guess. Thinking back, maybe I was enjoying my own adventure too. After Eddie graduated and started working, it was the first time I felt the clubroom was lonely. Oh, this is what love feels like. Apparently, he felt the same sense of loss, and a few years later, he proposed to me. That is the reason for our current situation. Eddie's income was sufficient, so our family never faced financial difficulties. Therefore, I didn't have to work and could focus on household chores. Actually, I had considered going out to work several times, but Eddie refused. According to him, it was the ultimate humiliation for people to think that a husband's income was so low that his wife had to work. Another routine in our household is waking up our only daughter, Mila, who is in 8th grade. She has never gotten up with just one call, and I have to call her at least 3 times. Though she has become more responsible since starting middle school, today it took 5 calls before she stumbled down the stairs. Conversations start in our house only after Mila wakes up. She talks about her friends, complaints about her homeroom teacher, and the latest popular artists. Eddie never responds, so she talks to me. While making sandwiches for the 2 of them, I listen half-heartedly, but I enjoy discussing the plot of the drama we watch together. In a household with little conversation, Mila is the one who brightens things up like a flower. Though I don't say it out loud, I am grateful that Mila's presence balances our family. Unlike us 2 bookworms, Mila has loved physical activities since she was little. Mila, who is extremely competitive, cried loudly when she didn't come in first at the elementary school sports day, delaying the next program. Although she has become more manageable with age, she has always been a child who constantly moves around, running around the playground during breaks. In the upper grades of elementary school, she became interested in tennis and wanted to join a tennis class. After entering middle school, she quit the tennis class but continued playing tennis in her school club activities. Besides physical activities, she can't stand having no plans on her days off and always finds reasons to go out. The topics of her conversations about friends change so frequently that it's hard to keep track. She easily makes friends with anyone, whether it's a child who often comes over, a club activity friend, or a classmate sitting next to her. When it comes to club activities, I have to know not only Mila's friends but also their parents to express my thanks properly. When Mila first entered middle school, I desperately made a notebook to keep track of her friends' relationships. I was worried that the pandemic might change Mila's social interactions. Club activities lost their competitions and games, and group outings were restricted. I thought she might feel lonely, but with modern SNS, not much has changed. I really want to take the family on trips, but the current infection control measures make it difficult. I feel guilty as a parent, but Mila doesn't seem to mind and shows no concern. Though Mila arrives at the table with a messy bedhead in the morning, she starts chatting non-stop once she sits down. The toast in her hand hardly gets any smaller.
Keep an eye on the time.
Okay. After spending some time zoning out, Mila slowly starts moving like in slow motion. This is the usual morning routine in our household. Eddie finishes his breakfast, folds the newspaper, and places it on the table. He stands up, heads to the sink to shave and brush his teeth. The chair Eddie stood from is always turned towards the hallway at the same angle. So meticulous, I think. However, he never clears his coffee cup or plate. In the early days of our marriage, I tried to address this, but Eddie always responded,
"That's a housewife's job."
After 23 years of marriage, I once consulted with my mother-in-law. Was he always this laid back? Carefully, I asked her about his henpecked husband nature. Seeing through my intention, she smiled wryly and sighed. "My husband was the epitome of a henpecked husband. Eddie wasn't particularly attached to him, but it's amazing how much he takes after him. My husband was the epitome of a henpecked husband. Eddie wasn't particularly attached to him, but it's amazing how much he takes after him." His attitude has remained unchanged even after Mila was born. As far as I remember, Eddie has never taken Mila out for fun. Although we've been on a few family trips, Eddie always looks expressionless in the photos. Neither Eddie nor I have any notable hobbies. Originally similar, our interest in books waned as we couldn't find quiet reading time. My attachment to unread books gradually faded, and I even got rid of some of the books I had accumulated since my student days. Hey, about these books on the shelf, should we get rid of them?
They're quite damaged, and some covers have faded so much you can't tell what they are.
We probably won't read them again in the future.
Shut up! Work is more important than reading. You should understand by now that you can't always spend time on things you like. Get rid of them if you want.
As the years go by, various passions cool. Some things change, some things don't, but it's strange that only the unpleasant things seem to stay the same for a long time.
Hey, lunch is late. Do you know what time it is?
Oh, I'm sorry. I hurriedly prepared and handed Eddie a sandwich.
Geez, he gets irritated if he's even a minute late leaving the house.
Eddie hurried out the door. At some point, we stopped saying I'm off and have a good day. But now, that feels normal. I no longer got worked up over it. Sometimes I would remember how Eddie used to laugh a lot in the beginning, but love and romance are different things. I wasn't looking for a romantic game anymore. I didn't need him to hold me tenderly. Is this what they call the state of resignation? As I pondered this, I called out to Mila once more. As Eddie, who kept precise time, left for work, Mila finally started to worry about the time.
What? It's already this late?
She finally began stuffing the half-eaten toast into her mouth. This was our routine every day until one afternoon. After a simple lunch, I was doing the dishes when I heard the door open.
Oh, Mila. Was today a day for early dismissal from school?
As I thought this, I headed to the entrance. There was Mila, sitting on the floor.
What's wrong, Mila? You're early. Your face is red.
I reached out to touch her neck. Her skin felt unusually hot. Hotter than just being warmed by the outside temperature. You have a high fever. It must have been tough. Usually, this would be the time she starts talking about all sorts of things that happened at school, but she could only manage.
I was fine in the morning, but around second period, I started feeling bad and went to the nurse's office. I thought I could make it home, but I got nauseous on the bus. I was fine in the morning, but around second period, I started feeling bad and went to the nurse's office. I thought I could make it home, but I got nauseous on the bus.
I quickly cleared her bed, and she collapsed onto it. Do you want something to drink?
Yeah, just let me sleep for now.
She croaked. With the flu going around, I was worried and managed to get her changed. As soon as the evening clinic opened, I called and made an appointment. Perhaps because she had slept a bit, she was more mobile than when she first got home. Still, I had to support her as we hurried to the clinic. The waiting room was packed, but because of Mila's high fever, we waited in an isolated area. Waiting with Mila resting her head on my shoulder, struggling to breathe, felt like an eternity, though it was actually only about 30 minutes. I wanted to let her lie down, but there was no space in the cramped waiting area. Finally, we were called into the examination room. Seeing that neither the doctor nor the nurse wore protective gear, I felt a little relieved. The diagnosis was a common cold, and no isolation was needed. I was relieved, but Mila was still unwell. After taking Mila home and sending her to her room, I rushed to the drugstore. I grabbed sports drinks for hydration, cooling pads, and debated whether she could eat jelly and soup before tossing them into the cart. I hurried back home and checked on her, who was resting peacefully. Feeling reassured, I went down to the living room, sank into the sofa, and took a deep breath. Maybe from all the running around, I felt more exhausted than usual. The sofa felt incredibly comfortable. Every muscle in my body seemed to relax completely, and a deep sigh escaped my lips. There was still time before Eddie got home. I still had time to prepare dinner. Just a little rest, I thought, as I lay down on the sofa. At some point, I dozed off, and when I opened my eyes again, the clock showed it was already evening.
Oh my!
I tried to get up, but my whole body felt heavy and my head pounded with each heartbeat. I quickly remembered the day's schedule. I might have caught her cold. Tentatively, I took my temperature. The thermometer read over 102.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Dazed, I pondered what to do next. I didn't have the strength or time to go back to the clinic. The biggest challenge was Eddie. He believed it was my duty to handle the household chores. If he came home to find nothing prepared, he would surely explode in anger. Just thinking about standing up and walking to the kitchen felt overwhelming. I quickly composed a text to Eddie, explaining that I wasn't feeling well. I told him that I couldn't prepare dinner and asked if he could buy something for dinner. My head was pounding, but I tried to write in a way that wouldn't upset Eddie. I sent the text and waited anxiously for his response, but there was none. After a while, the message was marked as read, but no reply came. I realized how much I was being swayed by Eddie's reactions.
That's right. I need to focus on getting something for Mila to eat.
Despite feeling dizzy, I made my way to the kitchen. Through the pain and nausea, I managed to make some soup for Mila and placed it by her bedside. Mila was sleeping soundly, but her face was still red. Small beads of sweat dotted her forehead. I gently wiped her sweat with a towel. Her warmth still radiated through the damp cloth. She still had a high fever. Soon after, the doorbell rang. Eddie was home. Usually, I would go to the door to greet him, but today I didn't have the energy to rush down. After a few more impatient rings of the doorbell, the door unlocked and opened.
Hey, at least come and greet me properly.
I could hear Eddie's voice shouting from the entrance. Summoning all my strength, I replied.
I'm sorry, I've been taking care of Mila, and I'm not feeling well myself.
He didn't respond. But I could hear his heavy, irritated footsteps, so he must have heard. Immediately, his angry voice echoed.
Hey! Dinner isn't ready.
I couldn't help but be exasperated by Eddie's predictable behavior and heartless words. I slowly made my way down the stairs and finally reached the living room.
Welcome back. I sent you a text earlier. Did you see it? Mila has a high fever, and I think I've caught it too.
You managed to make dinner for Mila, so you can make mine too.
Eddie shouted, cutting off my words.
I barely managed to make Mila's dinner. You're an adult. You should be able to understand the text, I retorted.
Eddie seemed slightly taken aback, but quickly remembered something.
Hey, I have an important meeting tomorrow. I can't afford to get sick.
He glared at me with a harsh look and gestured for me to move away.
Sick people should be isolated. Go to the storage room.
Without thinking, he grabbed my sheets and took them to the storage room. He even went upstairs and ripped the sheets off Mila's bed while she was sleeping. Startled, Mila curled up, not understanding what was happening.
What are you doing? Mila has a fever.
Backing away as if I were a monster, Eddie snarled.
I don't care. My promotion depends on this meeting.
He threw Mila's sheets into the storage room.
There's no point in talking to him anymore.
I thought, utterly exhausted. I wrapped Mila's remaining blanket around her shivering shoulders. Without looking at me as I silently prepared water and medicine, Eddie put on a mask and yelled.
Get in there quickly!
Eddie pushed us halfway into the storage room and started disinfecting the common areas with alcohol. This felt like we were being treated like monsters.
Use the upstairs bathroom. Don't come down to the first floor,
he ordered, his words piercing through the door along with the sound of the alcohol spray. He seemed to have plenty of time to disinfect, despite his important meeting tomorrow. Mila and I ended up spending the night in the storage room. It started to rain outside. I could hear the gentle sound of rain, the irregular drips falling from the eaves. Although we were sheltered from the rain and wind inside the house, the storage room had no air conditioning and only a small skylight. The room, filled with seasonal appliances and clothes we rarely used, only had enough space for one person to lie down. Even though it was early summer, the heat lingered after sunset. The poor ventilation made it impossible to rest with the humidity from the rain and our fevers. Whether it was the heat or our fevers, the room felt stuffy. The skylight couldn't be opened. Mila's fever seemed to have subsided, but I could hear her faint sobs, likely from Eddie's harsh treatment. She tried to muffle her cries so I wouldn't worry, but her effort only tightened the knot in my heart. I couldn't tell if my fever or my thoughts were causing my head to steam. Since Mila was born, my priorities had shifted from reading to her. Whenever Mila suddenly wanted to go out or asked me to practice tennis with her, I could easily close my book. I didn't mind sending her to tennis lessons. Making her happy became my greatest joy. Mila, who is the most important thing in my life. The time spent thinking, worrying, and enjoying life with Mila. Her sleeping face, even as a middle schooler, was still adorable. My precious daughter. Thinking about it, there have been countless times I've been exasperated with Eddie, but this was unprecedented. My rising anger had apparently reached its limit. I started to plan my actions for the coming days. My long-dormant assertiveness began to reignite. How much time had passed? I must have fallen asleep. Morning came, and the rain had stopped. I touched her neck and felt the coolness. Her fever had finally broken, and I felt a sense of relief. At the same time, I felt lightened. I slowly stood up to put my plan into action.
He must have gone to work on time. Just wait and see.
Mom, I'm feeling much better than yesterday, but my whole body aches from sleeping on the floor.
You're still a bit unsteady. Don't push yourself.
Mila and I took turns showering and warmed up in the living room.
What was with Dad's behavior? I don't even want to call him Dad anymore. This time, it was awful. I've had many grievances, but this was too much. Mom, you've put up with too much. This is grounds for a divorce.
Mila, if that happens, would you come with me?
Of course. If it means staying with him, I'd rather live on my own.
Holding back tears of relief and joy, I shared my plan with Mila, who nodded firmly. We devised a detailed plan and executed it diligently. First, we exaggerated our coughing and sneezing in the living room and bedroom. We replaced the alcohol in the spray bottles with tap water. We swapped the disinfectant wipes with regular wet wipes. We kept only the necessary painkillers and cold medicine and disposed of the rest. Mila's prescription from the clinic had been used up by the time she recovered. I picked up my smartphone for a particular search. When Eddie came home that night, he made no comments or showed any concern for us, focusing on preparing dinner. More than the disappointment of not hearing a caring word from him, I felt a determination similar to just wait and see. A month passed. The plan was a bit delayed, but the results came steadily. Eddie came home earlier than usual, looking unsteady.
Oh, what's wrong?
Are you feeling sick? I feigned concern with thinly veiled words.
I think I have a fever. I'm worried about work, but I left today's tasks to my subordinates.
From his tone, it seemed he intended to go to work tomorrow. Work is important, right?
Why not? Now is a crucial time.
Suppressing a smirk, I finally said the words I had been waiting to say.
Mila and I should avoid getting sick. For the sake of your important work, we'll stay separate.
I said this and gave Mila, who had just come home, the okay sign. Mila and I quickly gathered our pre-packed bags and moved out.
Hey, who's going to take care of me?
He called out in a hoarse voice.
Sorry, but we have to stay isolated. There's a note on the desk, I replied, leaving the divorce papers as we walked out.
I heard his angry shouts from behind, but I felt no regret. Instead, I was filled with a sense of liberation, as if freed from long-standing worries. The sunlight seemed brighter than usual. Mila seemed to feel the same, humming a tune. Her steps were almost like skipping. We moved into the house we had found earlier. We had been gradually moving things over, and he hadn't noticed. The new house, though smaller, was big enough for the two of us.
It's smaller than the old house. I'm sorry.
I apologized, and Mila responded cheerfully.
It's fine. It's much bigger than the storage room.
Mila replied with a hint of irony, and we both burst into laughter. For her, the biggest benefit was that there was a shopping district between her school and home, so she could hang out with friends and still get home on time. Her surprising efficiency must be the only positive trait she inherited from Eddie. After that, Eddie's calls came non-stop, draining my phone's battery. Texts were endless too. I quickly went to the phone company and changed my number and phone. Regarding the divorce, I contacted the court and found no records had been submitted, so I sent a certified letter through my lawyer. The lawyer facilitated the proceedings for an amicable divorce. Given that our lifestyle had relied heavily on Eddie's income, I expected a tough custody battle. However, Eddie didn't contest custody, so I easily obtained it. In truth, I had been saving money secretly since I started feeling resigned about my life with Eddie. Eddie, who never cared about household finances, was unaware of this. I had enough savings, but to cover Mila's tuition and future expenses, I started working part-time. I found a job at a small bookstore that also dealt in second-hand books. I liked the owner's personality and their respect for books, so I applied and got the job. Having lived as a housewife, I was nervous about handling a job, but my efficiency was recognized, and I got along well with my colleagues. Indeed, I could be proud of my efficiency over the past month since deciding to divorce. Mila seemed even brighter than before. Perhaps Eddie had chained us both down invisibly. Looking out the window of my part-time job, I saw Eddie walking tiredly in a wrinkled suit. I doubted he even knew how to use an iron or where it was. I had no interest in a passing stranger and turned back to my work immediately. Recently, I found more time to read at home again. Partly because I had more time, but mainly because Mila was becoming more independent.
Good morning.
Mila greeted me as I woke up, preparing toast for breakfast. She was indeed changing. I felt joy in this change as I bit into my toast. What is happiness for people? As the saying "to each their own" suggests, it varies from person to person. Just as having a meaningful job is essential in life, having the right partner may be one of the greatest sources of happiness. I'm Margaret. For the past 3 years, I've been working as an assistant to certified nursing assistants. Now, I'm responsible for duties related to the Care Manager certification exam, and I'm motivated to train as many professionals as possible to support the increasingly vital caregiving industry in our aging society. I first encountered caregiving when I was in middle school. At that time, my family consisted of my parents, my younger brother, my grandma, and me, a family of 5. My grandma, who had been quite spry for her age, had a fall. She fractured a bone, and although it healed, she was left with mobility issues and became almost bedridden. My family, unprepared and without the necessary mindset, had to start caring for Grandma. Without the knowledge or skills required for caregiving, we were constantly struggling and experimenting. All that accumulated was a sense of exhaustion and helplessness. The burden on my mother, who was the primary caregiver, must have been immense. When it became clear that my mother might collapse under the strain, we decided to seek professional help. With the support of a home care worker, the load on our family significantly decreased. The tasks performed by professionals were efficient, and Grandma enjoyed a peaceful daily life. The financial burden was indeed considerable, but the benefits far outweighed the costs. Most importantly, with less time dedicated to Grandma's care, our family life returned to something close to normal. The home care workers, who brought this relief to us, inspired my deep interest in the caregiving profession. In the summer of my senior year in high school, Grandma passed away. She departed peacefully, leaving words of gratitude behind. One message was for the home care workers, and the other was for our family. She expressed heartfelt thanks to the home care workers for their devoted care and to us for introducing them to her. I remembered the home care worker saying that caregiving is a rewarding job that helps people. I decided I wanted to pursue a career in this field. According to the home care worker, anyone can do caregiving work, but having qualifications allows for a broader range of duties. There are certifications such as Certified Nursing Assistant Training and Care Manager, and obtaining these can lead to career advancement, so I decided to acquire all of them. I thought that by understanding all aspects of caregiving and being involved in the field, I could contribute to revitalizing the caregiving industry. Despite being an essential job in society, caregiving is often underpaid. The working conditions are also underdeveloped, leading to a shortage of caregivers, a situation I wanted to change. After graduating from high school, I considered attending a vocational school for caregiving, but I chose a 4-year university to gain a solid education and earn qualifications. While studying at university, I worked part-time at a caregiving office to gain as much experience as possible.
Mom, are you listening? You seem a bit distracted.
The voice brought me back to reality.
Oh, Brittany. I'm sorry. I was just lost in thought.
My daughter Brittany had been trying to get my attention a few times. Are you thinking about work?
Yeah, it started with that, and then I started thinking about the past. Why I took this job in the first place.
How many years has it been since I graduated college? With an adult daughter, it's obvious that I've aged too. Thinking about it like this makes me realize how much of an older woman I've become. I've spent my life working tirelessly in the caregiving industry, determined to raise the social recognition and improve the conditions of caregiving jobs. This job has always been a perfect fit for me, and my days have been filled with my work, which is practically my life. However, meeting a certain man made me realize that there's more to life than just work. He was involved in a job that was indirectly related to caregiving. That's why we met. He was different from me, but had a strong sense of mission and a desire to make the world a better place. Our similar values drew us together, and our differences intrigued us. I never thought about getting married, but it felt natural to end up with someone who changed my perspective from the ground up. In the second year of our marriage, our daughter Brittany was born, and I took a break from caregiving. I had never imagined myself becoming a mother, being such a workaholic. But the time I spent with Brittany was irreplaceable, and I spent my days raising her with the help of my husband. As time passed and she grew, I gradually returned to work, but my approach to it had changed since becoming a mother. By the time she became an adult, the aging society had progressed even further, and the need for caregiving would be several times greater than it is now. So, I felt a strong need to strengthen the caregiving industry to prevent young generations from being overburdened. This conviction made me even more dedicated to my work. Seeing my dedication, she grew interested in caregiving and said she wanted to pursue the same career. Hearing my child express the desire to follow in my footsteps was a powerful moment for me. While I was more than half happy, I also worried because caregiving is tough and there might be other jobs more suitable for her. Even so, I wanted to respect Brittany's wishes and decided to support her. As expected of my daughter, she continued to hold on to her strong resolve and even obtained her certified nursing assistant qualification. After gaining 5 years of practical experience, Brittany earned her care manager certification just a month ago and is now thriving at a large caregiving agency. As a mother of a daughter in her prime, while I think it's great that Brittany is devoted to her work, I worry if she is thinking about marriage at all. I haven't seen any sign of a partner, which makes me even more concerned. But I can't talk about marriage with much authority either. In fact, my husband and I finalized our divorce 4 years ago. We were both the type to plunge headfirst into our work, and we had been managing well together. However, when my husband's job changed slightly due to a transfer, the differences in our stances became clear. We started having more frequent arguments over differing opinions, causing a strain on our relationship. Amid this, we found our paths slightly diverging, and our inability to separate work from our personal lives led us to have numerous discussions, eventually deciding to part ways. It's rare to choose divorce over work-related differences when there's no infidelity or debt involved. Proof of that is the surprise and disbelief of our friends when they heard the reason for our divorce. We didn't hate each other and we still remained Brittany's parents, so even after the divorce, we continued to interact and sometimes worked together on shared goals. Even though we interacted, we were still divorced, so it was awkward to talk about marriage with Brittany. It was on a sunny holiday in early summer when I realized that my concerns about Brittany's marriage were unnecessary.
Mom, I have a boyfriend, and he proposed to me the other day.
Brittany spoke to me, shyly but with a serious look in her eyes. At first, I couldn't immediately grasp what Brittany meant. The word proposal didn't register, and I just stared at Brittany in a daze. But I quickly regained my composure and started bombarding Brittany with questions. Brittany explained that the care facility she worked for was quite large, so they often received requests for support from understaffed facilities. It was at one of these support assignments that Brittany met her destined partner, Kevin.
It was supposed to be my day off, but my parents dragged me out to help. I don't know much about caregiving, so I mostly did the heavy lifting.
Kevin's parents ran a home care agency, but he worked in a different field. Guess what his job is? He's an international pilot, a first officer. His workplace is the cockpit of a plane. I couldn't believe someone like that would come into my life. She had gone to support a small, newly established care facility about 3 years ago. I remembered giving some advice about the new establishment back when I was in charge of supporting such facilities. Anyway, it was surprising to learn that Brittany had been dating someone and that she was now engaged. Kevin seemed like a wonderful person, and the fact that his job was unrelated to ours might be a good thing. I didn't know much about being a pilot, but I understood it was an impressive job. As a parent, I just had to trust my daughter's choice.
Mom, our families are meeting for the first time soon, so please be ready.
The days flew by after she told me about her engagement, and soon it was the day for our families to meet. Kevin made a very positive impression. What I appreciated most was his pride and confidence in his job as a pilot. Kevin also showed understanding towards his parents' caregiving business, which was a plus. This meant he also understood our line of work. The success of his parents' business suggested their sincere dedication.
We're thrilled that Brittany, a certified care manager, will become our son's wife.
And Mrs. Margaret, you have made significant contributions to the caregiving industry. We are honored to become relatives.
While their compliments were flattering, it felt a bit embarrassing. The conversation naturally focused on work, which was inevitable, but I noticed a few things that caught my attention.
Running a facility is harder than I thought. Funding is crucial. Most of our profits are consumed by maintenance costs. Without subsidies, we wouldn't make it.
Care facilities can receive grants from the government or local authorities if they meet certain conditions. The forms of grants vary, but they generally don't need to be repaid. To run a facility healthily and help its users, these grants are essential, and I had previously worked hard to expand this system. I'll be getting involved with this matter again at some point. So, I understand that it's natural for them, the managers, to rely on grants, but I was bothered by how much they seemed to prioritize making a profit in their language. Of course, since it's a business, they need to generate profit to keep it running, but in the case of caregiving, shouldn't the convenience of the users be prioritized? That said, they aren't doing anything wrong. There's just a slight difference in perspective and stance between me, who is not a facility manager, and them. And here, what's important is the character of Brittany's fiancé, Kevin. I'm glad I could give him my seal of approval. After our conversation ended, Brittany's wedding plans proceeded smoothly. As the wedding date approached, she talked about her plans after the marriage. When I get married, I'll move to Andrew's office. Also, we're going to live with his parents. I was surprised that she would leave her current large office, but I felt uneasy about the idea of newlyweds living with his parents right away.
That place can't compare to your current one in terms of size. Why are you moving there? And living with his parents right after getting married, is that okay?
It was a natural concern for me, but she said she had been invited by his parents like this.
Precisely because it's smaller, you'll have more autonomy and be able to fully utilize your abilities, making it a rewarding workplace,
Brittany said, not entirely displeased. And I want to support him as his wife. Kevin had suggested the cohabitation. As an international pilot, he's away from home for days when on flights, and he worries, so he wants his wife to be with his parents for peace of mind. While I could understand his feelings, I still felt concerned about it.
I'll be working with Andrew, and his parents are kind people, so it'll be fine.
Though I had my worries, since it was something Brittany and her soon-to-be husband had decided together, I thought it best to refrain from interfering. I decided to trust her and keep quiet. The wedding went off without a hitch, and Brittany and Kevin started their new life together. Both her new job and new life were going well, and Brittany contacted me to say she was enjoying every day, which relieved my worries. It looks like they're still struggling with finances. I looked at the books, and the income and expenses are about the same or slightly in the red. Running a facility is tough. While caregivers must act in the best interest of the users, it's also necessary to focus on maintaining the facility. If the foundation for providing services falters, they won't be able to offer adequate support. Mom, do you have any information on grant applications?
Well, there's a seminar on grants coming up. How about attending it? It could be useful for the future.
When I suggested this, Brittany said she'd invite her in-laws right away. So, I decided to attend the seminar too. I had been unsure about going, but this turned out to be a good opportunity. Kevin is probably over the Pacific right now. Depending on his destination, once he flies out, he won't be back for a week. I was prepared for this, but it's still a little lonely, she said before hanging up. Her saying she felt lonely was probably her true feelings. Brittany, her in-laws, and Kevin attended the seminar I had mentioned.
Since I just finished a flight, I have some time off. I want to understand Brittany's work better and be with her, so I decided to come along.
Brittany, sitting next to Kevin, looked quite shy with her ears turning red.
Isn't the lecturer Charles the one they call Monster Charleses? They say he's really strict.
Brittany asked worriedly, trying to reassure her parents.
Oh, some people say that, but he's just very dedicated to his work. He really cares about the healthcare industry.
Charles, the lecturer, is a government official who oversees grants, ensuring they are appropriately allocated and not misused. If there are any discrepancies or fraud in the applications, it's his job to uncover and address them. It so happened that last year, there were a series of fraudulent claims nationwide. Charles led the investigations and strictly enforced the law, earning him the nickname Monster Charleses across the country. The seminar was so popular that the venue was packed, and Charles, with his professional presentation skills, captivated the audience.
Grant programs are essential for the smooth operation of healthcare businesses. They must be fairly distributed, and there must be no fraud involved in receiving them. If any fraud is discovered, it will be met with strict legal penalties.
Charles used examples from the previous year's fraud cases, explaining the rules and penalties, while clearly outlining various grants.
There are many dedicated individuals working to improve the social status and working conditions in the healthcare industry. It's crucial that we all maintain our integrity and commitment to our roles, helping those in need of care, and thereby stabilizing society. It's all in your hands. Keep up the good work.
As Charles concluded the seminar with an inspiring speech, the audience erupted in applause. As we left the venue, everyone started sharing their thoughts.
Well, I wouldn't say it was entertaining, but it was definitely educational. The passion and power of that guy are impressive.
Yes, he truly is amazing.
What? Brittany, are you a fan of Charles? Oh, no, not exactly a fan.
Kevin's teasing made Brittany nervous, which amused me, so I couldn't help but laugh. Brittany immediately glared at me.
But it was indeed quite impactful. That's why they call him Monster Charles.
But we learned about different grants. We should apply for the necessary ones right away. Brittany's parents started discussing amongst themselves, leading to the end of our gathering. I wanted to spend more time with Brittany, but it couldn't be helped. She probably wanted some time alone with Kevin, whom she hadn't seen in a week. A month after the seminar. I hadn't seen Brittany since then and was thinking of giving her a call. Suddenly, she showed up at my house.
Oh, what's wrong?
How have you been? Is work going well? I had heard from a contact that her company, run by Kevin's parents, had applied for several grants in Brittany's name. Knowing her, I expected her to say everything was fine and that work was going well, but something seemed off. Her face was dark and lifeless. I quickly searched for another topic.
By the way, about the test questions you gave me feedback on, I made some adjustments based on her suggestions, and they turned out great. Thank you.
I serve on the committee for the Care Manager Certification Exam questions. So, I had asked Brittany, who is an active care manager, for her opinion on the next exam questions. However,
I shouldn't have gotten involved with the test questions. Maybe I shouldn't have chosen a career in caregiving.
She muttered to herself without looking at me.
What's wrong, Brittany? Did something happen?
It's nothing, Mom. I guess I'm just not as strong as you. After that, no matter what I asked, she kept dodging my questions and soon left. Her retreating figure seemed so small, like she might disappear entirely, heightening my worry. I tried calling Brittany several times after that, but even over the phone, I could tell she was becoming more and more exhausted.
What's wrong? If you're not feeling well, you should see a doctor.
I'm fine. It's not an illness, so don't worry.
How can I not worry? You don't sound well, and it concerns me.
Every time I called, we had the same exchange. Frustrated, I decided to contact Kevin.
That's right. Brittany hasn't been well lately. When I asked if something happened at work, she strongly denied it. She won't tell me anything, so I'm at a loss.
Kevin is preparing for his promotion to captain and has been increasing his flight hours to secure the necessary time.
So, I'll be away on a flight again from tomorrow for a week. I wish I could stay by her side.
I understand. Leave Brittany to me and focus on your work.
Thank you, Margaret. I appreciate it.
5 days later in the evening, I had guests at my house. While talking with one, another person arrived. We talked with 3 people, then another joined us. As we chatted with 4 people, time flew by, and it was already dark outside. Since my mobile phone was on silent mode during the visit, I checked the display in case someone had tried to contact me. To my surprise, I had 30 missed calls from Brittany. When I called her back, she answered immediately.
Mom, I can't take it anymore. I can't bear this.
Her voice was faint and trembling, mixed with sobbing.
Wait there. I'm coming right now.
I grabbed my car keys and rushed out of the house. When I arrived at Brittany's place, I rang the doorbell repeatedly and shouted her name. The door opened, and Brittany staggered toward me, clinging to me as she burst into tears. I hugged her, assuring her that everything would be all right. Just then, Brittany's in-laws appeared, looking annoyed.
What on earth is going on? Margaret, why are you here at this hour? That's my line. What have you done to Brittany to make her suffer this much? I don't know what you're talking about, but it's inappropriate to come at such an hour.
As they tried to send me away, the person I brought with me stepped out of the car and said to them,
You are the ones being unreasonable. Do you even understand what you've done?
Brittany's in-laws were utterly shocked by his stern tone.
Charles, why are you here?
The person I brought along was Charles, who had given a passionate speech at a recent seminar. With eyes filled with anger, he addressed them.
We know everything you did. How dare you use my daughter? I will not forgive you. Charles's daughter? Brittany? What do you mean?
What I hadn't told them was that Charles was my ex-husband. In other words, he is Brittany's father. We had planned to invite Charles to Brittany's wedding, but he couldn't attend due to work commitments. So, Brittany's in-laws didn't know that he was her father. I had felt too embarrassed to tell them about the circumstances of our separation because I had struggled to gain understanding from friends and acquaintances about our situation. The reason for our divorce was the clash between my focus on supporting caregivers and his focus on exposing and condemning their wrongdoings. In the end, Charles was also working to protect the social standing of the caregiving profession, so our ultimate goals were aligned, which I understood well.
Brittany came to me for advice, and I investigated. You forced her to apply for fraudulent benefits. How could you make someone who takes caregiving so seriously do such a thing? And that's not all. You demanded she give you the exam answers for the care manager certification. You threatened to make her break up with Kevin if she didn't comply.
As Brittany explained, almost in tears, another person stepped out of the car and spoke loudly.
That is unmistakably blackmail. How could you make your niece do such a thing? Aren't you the senator's niece?
This time, it was Laura who gasped in surprise. The man who had come with Charles was my brother Thomas, who now serves on a committee dealing with caregiving policies, working to improve the industry from the political side. Thomas was also too busy to attend Brittany's wedding, so the in-laws had no idea we were related. When Brittany's in-laws realized who we were, their faces turned pale, and they began to tremble. It was sheer despair knowing all their wrongdoings were laid bare. And then, the last person stepped out of the car. With a stern expression, he glared at them.
Dad. Mom. How could you do this to her?
After scolding his parents, Kevin looked at Brittany.
Brittany, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. It must have been so hard for you.
The moment Brittany saw Kevin, she left my side and rushed into his arms. I felt a pang of loneliness, but then I reminded myself this was for the best, and I faced the in-laws.
People like you are why the caregiving profession is misunderstood by society. The responsibility you bear is immense. You will pay the price.
Even the sun they didn't expect to see in the US showed up, and they finally collapsed, bowing their heads until they nearly touched the ground. The police then arrived, and the two were taken away for questioning and later detained. We also went to the police station as witnesses, and through our testimonies, their wrongdoings were fully uncovered. The Caregiving Business Subsidy Fund does not require repayment. Since it is given as a grant, any money received is pure profit. Once they tasted the benefits of receiving the grant, they started repeatedly falsifying documents and applying fraudulently, even though they were not eligible. The person used in this scheme was Brittany, who holds a care manager qualification. Because of the trust Brittany had built in her work, the documents she submitted were seen as credible. The numbers provided by the highly skilled care manager, Brittany, were so well crafted that they were difficult to detect. Moreover, the two people who wanted to increase the number of care managers in their office forced her to leak information as soon as they learned she had helped create the exam questions. The qualifications for taking the exam require practical experience, but Brittany was instructed to falsify this period as well. Brittany, threatened with being separated from Kevin if she did not comply, unwillingly followed their instructions, but this led to a growing conflict in her heart, and she began to suffer mentally. She didn't come to me for help but to Charles, which was a bit disappointing, but maybe in times of real need, a father is the one you can rely on. The visitors that day were Charles, Thomas, and Kevin. Charles had come to our house to discuss this issue. Thomas happened to visit me by coincidence. The reason Kevin came to our house was that there was trouble with his scheduled flight, and his flight schedule had changed, allowing him to return home earlier than planned. He wanted to thank me for Brittany and visited with a gift before heading home. At that time, the four of us shared information about what was happening around Brittany. And when we heard Brittany's cry for help, the four of us jumped into the car. All the fraudulently obtained subsidies had to be returned. Their methods were extremely malicious, far from being simple mistakes. Fraudulently receiving subsidies can be considered a crime of fraud, potentially resulting in imprisonment for up to 10 years. At the prosecutor's request for detention, they were held for a long period. This prolonged detention not only exhausted them mentally and physically, but also affected their daily lives. The funds of their office were depleted by the return of the subsidies, so the closure of their business was certain. Thus, they would be unemployed. Even if they were released on bail without prosecution in the future, there would be no place for them in the caregiving industry anymore. Brittany was not prosecuted because she was coerced, so her record remained unblemished. Kevin, distressed by the suffering inflicted on his wife, declared he was cutting ties with his parents. While it is not legally possible to sever the parent-child relationship, it is possible to avoid future contact. Brittany's emotional wounds healed over time, allowing her to return to work. From now on, work will further energize her. But the one who supported her the most was her husband, Kevin. It would not be an exaggeration to say that thanks to him, Brittany recovered. She truly found a great partner. I feel deeply that this is the most important thing. Speaking of partners, this incident has led Charles and me to start mending our relationship. Perhaps it was unclear why we separated, but now we feel like bridging the 4 years we were apart. It's not a matter of which is more important, work or private life, but both are invaluable parts of life, and I've come to realize this at this age. While both his work and my work are important to enrich our lives, I have come to believe that merging our time and walking together is the most important thing.